All right, welcome to this Stampscapes lab using the marble paper again. I've really been enjoying playing around with this, and one of the things I'm going to try out is kind of working more within the range of the palette of this paper right here, so gray tones. So I have a couple different gray tones here that I'll incorporate in with the stamping of the imagery with this paper. Okay, so again, if you haven't seen my other videos, using this paper, it's just a really cheap disposable placemat paper, for eating, putting your plates on and just, tossing out after you're done with them. So really inexpensive, pack of 111 by 17 pieces. I don't remember how much it was, but the cost per piece, as far as, if we compare it to other papers that are, traditional stamping papers or ones that people use for stamping, it's relatively inexpensive. So disposable, So just just know that if you order this type of paper, a lot of them are pretty thick. The suede one is kind of coated and somewhat shiny, and the wood grain one was a little bit stiffer than this one here, but still pretty cool. All right, holding my stamp down for a little bit longer of a time than stamping on, a piece of whatever, matte cardstock or something like that, because this paper, although it looks nice and white and it is a matte surface on here, it is coated with the printer inks in order for, the imagery to show up. So even in the white areas, I suspect that there's something kind of printed on there. So in other words, when you stamp on there, you have to allow for kind of your ink transfer and penetration time a little bit more than you probably normally would. Okay, so stamp and hold. I'm going to put a little bit more pressure on this one too. I'm using these large stamps here for this scene. So that was the Lakeside Cove Large, and this is the Pines and Rocks. And I'm stamping on it with a pretty dark black. Okay, and a darker impression than that one right there. I don't know, maybe I stood up and pressed into it a little bit harder than, this time. All right, let me just flip this around so you can see I'm going to overlap that image a little bit with this one right here. With Stampscapes, there's times when you might do some masking, but I designed the stamps for that so that, for the most part, you're just going to be overlapping your stamps. You're not going to have to use careful masking techniques, and that's for the seamless nature of the imagery. You want everything to blend in with one another, but it's also just to try and remove as much tedium as possible, such as careful masking. So overlap everything and you'll get nice seamless scenes and imagery. Okay, so we have these larger pines and rocks here. They're a little bit closer, and then we have this cove going back in the distance like that. It already looks gray because when you're stamping on this type of paper, at least with the inks that I've been using, you don't get 100% black. I don't know. You see where they overlapped, it's a little bit darker. But let me see. Let me use that one. Stamp again here. Pines and Rocks Large. It's a little bit inky right now. Press that down. These scenes go really fast too. because you can't do too much on them. This paper is just too thin to build up a lot of inks, a lot of layering of inks, or other type of media. And again, I mean, it's not, you know, to say that this is like a poor quality paper. It's designed to be eaten off of, you know, food, and you toss it out. So, you know, it's great for that purpose and for the decorative kind of nature of it. You know, it'd be pretty cool as a placemat, I guess, rather than just you know, something just plain without any type of patterning on it. Yeah, it looks pretty. It looks pretty real. Okay, adding in some trees in here that are, you know, supposed to represent closer trees. The lower you stamp something, the closer it is to you, relatively speaking. In Western perspective, at least. I'm not sure what other types of perspective there is. There's Asian, like Chinese artwork, and I think, I don't know, I heard that some imagery, based on where it is on a piece, I heard it was to represent different times or something like that. Ages, I guess, eras. That's the way my professor explained it, though. Although I don't think he ever showed us an example of that. All right. A few extra trees right here in the foreground, like so. Pretty fast. Now let's try to incorporate. I didn't leave much room here for my background trees. I guess I could have, or should have. Okay, so this I'm not going to stamp out in black. I'm going to stamp it in a lighter tone. And yet it has to be lighter than these right here in order to represent something that's farther back in the distance. Preferably something as dark or darker than the gray that's down here, okay? I don't know if the memento is a little bit lighter. Let me go with this. Yeah, I'm going to the memento. A lot of my Marvy pads are... they're toast. A lot of them are like 30 years old, so I can use this to ink up something if I'm inking up like a sponge or something and sponging on color, but the foam surface is pretty worn out. Okay, so let's see. I'm wiping off the bottom of this so that it transitions a little bit from wet to dry. And we're going to just place this right in here. And the drier area down in the lower areas are the areas where it's going into my, you know, my previously stamped impressions, so that there's a little bit more contrast between this image and down here. So it's a little bit darker up here, a little bit lighter here, so you can see this nice silhouette of the trees. This would probably be light enough if I didn't stamp it out and I just stamped it on there, but I think just kind of wiping it off the bottom is a little bit better. It just depends if this is a lot darker. Like the Marvy one, it would probably be good to wipe it off. The memento, maybe, you know, we don't need to do that, but let's do it anyways because it takes like, you know, 2 seconds to wipe it off. All right, see that? It creates that nice... Now this ideally would be about the same tone as that. We can see there's a little bit of this reddish tinge in there, so this is much more of a neutral gray. But I think it looks pretty good like that. All right, now one of the things that I do at times, and it looks like we could do it here, is we can create some reflections. So let me wipe through here. I'm going to try to do this too. I'm going to wipe through some of the trees because this is supposed to be a reflection. You might be able to see some of the striations. It's not a perfect reflection because we're just flipping this upside down, but I think that'll match up reasonably with that. All right, so you see that? It's right down here. I don't know, maybe I didn't need to wipe it off. There, I won't wipe this one off right here. And I'll just match this tree up with this one right here. Roughly. Like that. Yeah, looks okay. All right, and let me get a little bit more on that. I guess I shouldn't have wiped that off. This image is too light for that. I won't try to stamp right over it, but I'll just get some extra trees right in there. And then, let's see, I won't do any over here. These would have larger reflections down here, but see, it would interfere with these images right here if I made it too dark. So artistic license. And we'll leave those reflections out of here. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll just go in with some gray tone coloring here. This is it's a little bit of a cool tone, slate gray, and here's just a black watercolor pencil. I've been using that one just because my my Prismacolor black is getting pretty small. So let's do these two right here. Let me get this out of here. Let me see, I'm trying to think of it. Let's put some, we need some kind of subject matter in here. I'll have like a, I don't know, someone boating in there. We can also make this a frozen lake too, but let's make it a just, I don't know, reflective type of water area down here. All right, I changed my mind. I was thinking about going with like a boating fisherman or something like that. I want to go with this moose here. It's a little bit more bold, maybe dramatic. I like to transition my shadows right there a little bit, so let's give that a try. This is our subject matter, so let's try to get a pretty decent dark impression out of it. Don't squish down on its horns too much. This is the moose from Nature set number 41, I believe. That's a pretty dark impression there. I don't know. Maybe it's, I don't know, I get my pressure, you know, concentrated in one little stamp like that. Maybe it makes for a stronger impression or something like that, a darker one. Okay, so let's go in with my couple pencils here and we'll add some shadow work in here. So I'm doing it at the base of these rocks. This is a pretty light toned application of this right here. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of anchoring the imagery into the scene a little bit more with some additional shadow work. Okay, there's shadows that are kind of inherently drawn into the design via the stippling. So, and then I'll add a little bit of tone to some of these rocks, but let's leave the tops of the rocks light. Okay, so I'm going up midway on the rocks. You can see where there's kind of tone on the rocks themselves. Like I said, there's some stippling, little dot pattern. If you have pastels or something like that, or pastel pencils, you can do this. Or I don't know about charcoal, maybe. If you'd use charcoal, you'd have to spray seal this. You can extend your shadow work of your moose out a little bit. I'm going to go in with my black now. Now, you don't want the shadows to be darker than the imagery, though, okay? So don't make a super dark shadow like that in this kind of grayscale impression. You can make it as dark as that though. So just work a very light application like this. All right, I think that should just about do it. We'll add in some white now. All right, a couple different pens here. Same type, acrylic paint pens, 3mm and a 0.7 millimeter. You can use a white gel pen or whatever you like. Okay, I'm gonna try to add some highlights on the tops of some of these rocks. Remember how we've retained some of the lighter areas by not toning them in. You know, the bottom half of the rock, we've kind of added some black or gray to add shadow, but on the tops of the rocks, where they're just inherently lighter anyway, we're going to lighten them up more. And that's one of the things that's nice about working on this paper. This paper isn't quite, I mean, it looks white or something like that, but this is like white here. So you can add this in there and it makes it look, you know, it stands out a little bit more. So if I did this on just a white piece of paper, you know, we wouldn't get this kind of effect here. So it's pretty fun, starting with this, you know, slightly darker than white surface in the lightest of areas, and then doing all this work right here and just kind of adding in these little touches like that and kind of make them stand out a little bit more. You can put some of this white on some of these trees, the tree limbs like this. And again, you know, it kind of adds some dimension into the scene, you know, adding light and dark, light and shadow, basically, into our scene by placing these types of highlights on objects. It gives the objects more of a dimensional feel. We're saying that it's not just this flat object in this environment. It's these little highlights describe the form a little bit more. Like my hand here isn't, you know, you can see lights and darks on there, so we know it's, you know, a dimensional object as opposed to, you know, some flat piece of paper like that that's neutrally toned. You make it three-dimensional and suddenly you have that lighting on there. Okay, so that's kind of what we're doing here, you know, just in a very simple way. Sometimes I tone in my trunks a little bit to give them a little bit more kind of more of a foundation or something like that. I don't usually do it with my pine trees, but now that looks a little bit weird, so I'll kind of break up that, you know, that little trunk in there a little bit more. But sometimes doing those trunks, especially in deciduous trees, it creates the, I don't know, kind of a stable type of feel, because you can see like the, you know, the trunk is actually reflecting some of that light. Yeah, so something like that. All right. right, and let's grab a piece of cotton ball here, and let's see if we can add a little bit of atmosphere to the scene. You can see if you like it or not, and choose to do it or not, but I would recommend playing around with this a little bit and adding it to your scenes because it can add a lot of light and texture. Okay, so these are the most distant trees in here. Don't put it over the whole thing, but you can see just if you put it over like some areas like right here and right here, see it kind of adds that soft lighting in here. So you get crisp in here, but then you also have soft, so you get this oscillation of textural oscillation, sharp and soft, and it represents really soft light coming through things, so it creates atmosphere. You can add it down here. This is kind of a dry cotton ball. I'm tapping it into my pad right here, but I'm not putting on these blobs of ink, okay? So keep it nice and dry. My pad here is kind of dry. It's medium dampness, okay? And then where you start adding this in, you don't add it in like a really dark area and blah, blah, blah. You kind of start adding it into areas that are already kind of light so that there's not a lot of contrast between the white and what you're adding it over the top of. And then when you've tapped it in there a little bit, then you kind of move it into these, darker areas if you want to. But then by the time you do that, your cotton ball's a lot drier, and that's not applying as much. Sometimes people can't see what's happening. It's like happening so slowly, and they kind of like to rush it, so let ink up and they will blob. As opposed to getting the amount you want in 20 taps. They're not used to doing something like that when they first try this. So it's like, hey, where, is there anything on here? That's the feel. But you just keep tapping it. I mean, it's like, I don't know, it takes like, 5 seconds or something like that, maybe. But doesn't happen in, 1 second or something like that. Okay, see this right here? I've added like some shadow down here, or some mist into the shadow area, just for fun. And there you have it, like that. A little bit more depth with the use of grayscale background imagery within this grayscale foundation like this. This one just has a little bit of that around here. But again, you can see this is a different tone than a white piece of paper. See how it looks on there. I like matting mine on a piece of silver cardstock because I think it really pairs well with the grayish nature of this. So this could be something what it might look like if you mat it off. Did this for this skating one right there. But if you want a pretty fast type of stamping experience with, I think, a reasonable amount of kind of lighting and atmosphere and mood, going with these pre-printed papers that are fairly, interesting in the background, it makes for a really nice head start with stamping. It doesn't have to be something that really, blends in kind of in a way that makes sense, okay? Like, I don't know if that looks more like ice or something like that, but it could just be some clouds that are, whatever, shining on a surface or something like that. But it has these kind of inherent tones and textures right in the paper that are fun to work around and with. So I'd recommend giving it a shot. So this scene right here, it's a double half-page scene, so 2 quarter-page cards or something like that. This scene probably took me about I don't know, 20 something minutes, low 20s right here. A few impressions in black and a little bit of shading, a little bit of highlighting with black and white media. And you can call it quits. You can add a little bit more tone in here. I wouldn't color it too much again because this paper is like super cheap. And there's other marble papers out there, okay, that are much more thicker and high quality, but and you can do whatever you want, probably more things, with those thicker pulp papers because, it can absorb more of that media. But if you're working with something like this, even just a few applications can be really fun and effective. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.